Move on to the first part of our afternoon, our working lunch panel discussion around building a great city. A good city? A good enough city? A great city? Yeah, let's go with great. Let's do that. Let's do that, shall we? So I have the privilege of introducing our two panelists. Now, you may note that this differs from your agenda when there were 3 panelists. We are down to 2. That unfortunately, Professor James Johnson had a flight delay, mechanical delay, could not get another flight. He cannot join us today. And I think Brent is now thinking about how might we still get Dr. Johnson's input while we are gathered here this week. So we're going to figure out if we've got some other options around that and adjust our schedule accordingly. So with that said, let's go forth, shall we? So we have Deb Ryan, UNC Charlotte Professor of Agriculture and Urban Design.
No, architecture, not agriculture. I don't know much about agriculture. There you go.
Let's try that again from the top, shall we? Deb Ryan, UNC Charlotte Professor of Architecture and Urban Design. Good grief. We also have Rich Harris. See how I can mingle this. Executive Managing Director, Cushman & Wakefield, but here in Raleigh-Durham in the Triangle. Now, the first thing I get to do is to embarrass both of them a little bit. So Deb, I read your bio. You've done a lot of amazing, awesome stuff. Can you share with our assembled crowd just how awesome and amazing you are?
No.
That'd be great.
You know, I've had the privilege of working in Charlotte for over 30 years, and if you say that I've done lots of awesome things, I would hope that I had done something in the last 30 years that was noteworthy. So, I've been privileged to be able to work on the Planning Commission for, 7 years and chair it year before last, and been part of those discussions. But also, through my students at UNCC, we've been able to do a lot of innovative projects that sometimes find themselves in fruition, and sometimes they just start good conversations. So I've just sort of been hopefully a good part of the conversations about how cities grow over the last 30 years.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, ma'am. And Rich, so you're here in the Triangle. You've been in the Triangle here for a while. You also do some amazing, awesome stuff.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you folks from Charlotte that are making some important decisions for your city. I was struck by the fact that someone asked me to be on this panel, being that I'm from the Triangle, but was told I'm going to speak a lot to the business community. What I'm seeing in terms of the CEOs and CFOs that I'm sitting in the room with, what I'm hearing is important to them. A little bit of background on me. I've been in the commercial real estate industry for about 25 years. I started on the landlord side of the business and then quickly moved to the tenant side of the business. I started my own company after about 12 years and then sold that to a national company. And then I ran the Cushman & Wakefield office for the last 5 years. Just stepped down this past summer to get my life back. But my intent today is to just be as candid as I can be with all of you about kind of what I'm seeing. I'm also very involved in the various charitable organizations. Step Up is one that's near and dear to my heart that's been really successful in Durham and Chapel Hill, so Durham and Raleigh. So I do understand the interplay, a little bit of community and capitalism. So I'll try and be balanced in terms of what I share.
Awesome. All right, so we've got a list of 76 questions, and it's really important that you get these right.
All right.
So if a train leaves Pittsburgh at 7, no, not at all. But also, so the format of this is a conversation as well as Q&A from the members of the council, okay? And so, actually, ask you guys this. Do you want to take questions as they come up, or do you want to talk and then take questions at the end? Do you have a preference?
I think it's a small enough setting. I welcome any questions people have.
Me
Okay,
too.
Deb? All right,
Me
that's
too.
what we'll do then. So, question number 1. Deb, I'll direct this one to you, and then Rich, of course, chime in. What is the biggest lesson learned from other cities as it relates to managing growth in agriculture? No, I don't know. Managing growth.
you know, I've been on sabbatical since May, so I've been able to travel a lot. And for the last 3 weeks, I was on a cruise in South America. And while I was on the cruise, I came across this book, and it was the most amazing cities in the world. And so, of course, I flipped through it to see if Charlotte was in it, and we were not. Charleston and Asheville were, though, which was sort of interesting. And so it made me wonder, of course, what the criteria is, and it's always subjective, but it made me wonder, what are we doing today so that we will be that great city of the future? And I say that to preface my remarks about, what other cities are doing, and I think the most important one to me that I want to bring up today, which is probably going to be sort of a weird perspective after coming from my background on Planning Commission, is that the most significant lesson that I can think of right now is that we don't have to be victims of the tyranny of the normal. That's a term that Terry Shook, who many of you know, an architect in Charlotte, that he came up with, the tyranny of the normal. And so you sort of know what that is, right? It's the average, the common. It's what everybody does. It's what happens when you have design by committee, where everybody has an opinion, but nobody has a vision. And I think sometimes we have suffered from that in Charlotte, and that's understandable because most cities are actually very risk averse. And as we heard earlier, cities are risk averse because if you make a mistake, it shows up on the front page of the paper. So it's certainly understandable. But that often comes about, I think, because of who has a voice and who's in the room. And I just want to sort of think through that for a second about who has a voice. And right now, in most cities, the people who have a voice are homeowners. And all those renters that Mark talked about, they tend not to have a voice in the room. And so they cause us not to question assumptions, longstanding assumptions. And so what I want to suggest is that we look at Minneapolis. Now, I know some of you know about what has been going on in Minneapolis. There's a lot of young leadership there, like here. And one of the things that they questioned was single-family zoning, because 70% of their city is zoned single-family. And so as they were doing their comprehensive plan, they looked through the lens of economic mobility, just like we are. And they said what many people have been saying is that single-family zoning is bad for affordability, it's bad for economic mobility, and it's bad for the environment. And yet, for the people who live there, it's not bad for them at all, right? And so they're the ones who usually show up, and I call them the loud and the small, because there aren't that many of them, but they sure are loud, and speak of their fear of change. Now, we brought up trying to rethink single-family zoning on Planning Commission back when I was chair a couple years ago. And at that time, this was before Taiwo, staff said, absolutely no way, off the table, the community will never hear of it. And yet here we are today, perhaps giving it some thought. So what I want to end this question with is thinking about who we're listening to and sharing with you, which some of you already know about, is in Minneapolis, they have this advocacy group, and it's called Neighbors for More Neighbors. And I just think it's a wonderful way to begin to reframe our arguments when we think about who we're listening to and why.
That's fascinating. I'm not sure if you were here at the beginning. We were talking, or at some point this morning, we were talking about one of the approaches if you're looking to build inclusive communities, products, services, what have you, environments, experiences, is to first identify who you might be unintentionally excluding, who's not in the room, who's not at the table, and these sort of planning sessions would be certainly another forum for that. Rich, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I would start probably a little bit more philosophical. I think one of the challenges that anybody in government has is, you've got 50 fires, and where do you send the fire trucks? So I want to acknowledge that it can be challenging to figure out what the priorities are. But I do think that the word that kind of saves the day is balance, meaning that I think that it's important to try and be audacious and think without limitations. To bring prosperity to certain neighborhoods and that sort of thing. But I also think that it's important to keep your eye on the ball relative to what is working. There's a great book by Chip and Dan Heath called Switch, where he talks about, in business and in our approach to problems, oftentimes we're looking at what's not working. And so we shoot all of our resources to what's not working, and instead of taking what is working and replicate it, right? So I think that, I'd go back to the idea that there is balance to be had, that keeping your eye on the ball with respect to huge employers is really important. At the same time, that you take on some audacious projects, in areas that could use some upward economic mobility. So I think one other thing I would point out, just again from being the non-threatening triangle guy, is one lesson that I think we learned, and unfortunately this wasn't another city that went through this pain, and this is by not at all by means a political statement, because I'm leaving the politics to you guys, but I think the single biggest thing that I saw in terms of a misstep was the HB2 legislation. And I say that purely from a business perspective, because I was in more than a few conference rooms where I was dealing with leaders who were asking me, how can I sign a lease and bring all these jobs to a place where they may not, my employees may not have equity, And so that's was a very difficult conversation to have, number one, and number two, I think it was very challenging because it caught most of our business community and even some of our leaders a little bit on our heels. I certainly was taken aback a little bit by the legislation and the national attention, and I really tried to rally in commercial real estate to have people who had a genuine business interest in this issue to kind of step up. And I found it very challenging. I think, business leaders like to be agnostic. I mean, they just, put your head down and hide and hope that it's going to go away. But, it was with us for quite a while. And I saw a significant impact, not only to my business as a tenant broker, but also across our brokerage group. So, I mean, the numbers were real. And so I was calling my counterparts at Jones Lang LaSalle and CB Richard Ellis and other firms to say, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And are you hearing what I'm hearing? And I found it very difficult to rally people around the issue because no one wanted to take a stance. So I just think in general it's important to try and keep yourself out of the national headlines if at all possible, particularly for high growth cities like Charlotte and the Triangle. We want people to have no reason not to come here, right? There's plenty of reasons. There's plenty of competition, but we don't want to have big reasons for people not to come to our cities.
So I love that you mentioned Switch and their concept of bright spots, right? Instead of focusing only on what's not working, don't forget to pay attention to what is working. How do we scale it, replicate it? I think it's a little different than best practices. But anyway, Rich, I want to stay with you because we were talking earlier. And as you just mentioned, you're in a lot of conference rooms, you're in a lot of meetings with the CEOs, in essence, people who are making buying decisions, yep. Whether it's about should we relocate, should we stay here, should we expand here, and not just big companies, right? Not the companies with big buildings and their names on them, but all these other guys, the mid-sized and the small companies as well. Can you share a little bit about what you're hearing, what you're seeing as a terms for a city like Charlotte, both managing growth, growing those smaller companies, and how you're seeing this in terms of just commercial real estate?
Sure. Well, I think the predominant win, if you will, I'll start with the Triangle, is the skilled labor. So obviously we have 3 major universities and we have the Research Triangle Park. So we have a lot of educated people here, and that skilled labor serves, I think, as our primary engine for why so many folks come here. But when you dig deeper beneath just the skilled labor, I think you also see the cost of living. So keeping the cost of living down, when we talk about real estate, and Charlotte's certainly not that far from Raleigh-Durham in terms of rents, we're still a third of the rents in San Francisco. So when you start looking at a company that is trying to grow, trying to solve their hiring issues, having the ability to access that skilled labor quickly is probably the single biggest thing that I hear from folks. And then when you combine that with a cost structure, both a cost of living structure and rents for a business, that allows for people to make those decisions. I just represented Microsoft. You probably all have seen in the Business Journal. I know they did a big deal in Charlotte. I represented them on their deal here in the Triangle. And that was the single biggest focal point for them, was the amazing skilled labor coupled with the low cost of living. They also got a very nice incentive package, but that was kind of the driver for them. I do think accessibility, taxes, quality of life, these are all positives, and I think the Triangle and Charlotte score very well. Sometimes, you talk about Asheville, they've got wonderful mountains. You're dealt a really nice hand there. You guys are just a stone's throw from those and a stone's throw from the beach, and so much like the Triangle, we enjoy the ability to do a day trip to the mountains and a day trip to the beach, and I think that's a big thing that that I hear about as well, the quality of life. So that's probably.
Yeah, and I can pick up on that quality of life, and sort of break it down a little bit. So the most important investment to me would be quality of life investments, and so they're the hard quality of life investments like transit, obviously, really important, and the hard quality of life investments like good jobs, affordable housing, safety, good education. But then there's the soft quality of life issues, and that's the natural environment, and what I care mostly about in terms of what I do is the built environment. And then there's the social quality of life. And so increasingly, by my readings, is that employers are looking for not people that are just technically skilled, but also socially skilled. And because of that, then these socially skilled people are going to want social places to hang out. That only makes sense. So I'm going to get to what I think that means, but before I do, I also want to talk about this issue of belonging, because if we talk about social relationships, and part of what that means is a sense of belonging to your community, because it's about those sorts of networks. And so in terms of belonging to a community, the question is, how big can the community be and you still feel like you belong to it? And there's been an awful lot of research done for that for hundreds of years in terms of people trying to figure out what the ideal size of a community is. And I will tell you that Charlotte is bigger than the ideal by most rankings. That's perfectly okay, but what that means is that if we sort of visualize Charlotte as downtown/uptown surrounded by suburbs, we are no longer that. We are a multi-centric city, but we are almost that by accident, because those multi-centric places have been sort of built up through private investment. It's not like we as a city went out and said, okay, here, here, and here, and here are our centers. And what's important about that is that, just to back up for a second, although we are becoming multi-centric, from an urban design standpoint, there is absolutely no doubt that you need a strong center. Absolutely, got to have that before you can start getting multi. We've got that. And all those wonderful catalyst projects that you and your predecessors have done for Uptown, they are working. And Uptown is kicking. And you don't need to incentivize anything else in Uptown, because it's kicking. Question is, where is it not and where do you need to incentivize the kind of growth that you want. And I would suggest it's in all those secondary centers that are evolving around uptown, but are not yet the beneficiary of a lot of civic investment. You know, they tend to rely on private investment. Now, you got lucky in Ballantyne. I live on the north side of town, so you got lucky in Ballantyne, then we had a developer come in who said, you know, I'm going to build a park on top of this driving range. That's awesome. But not many times are we going to have that similar opportunity in other neighborhoods. So the question then is how and when and where do you start with that second level of investment? And what is it? You know, are we talking about, you know, sports and entertainment somewhere outside of uptown? And believe me, I know at one time I would say, no, never, 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 because we were busy building up the strength of uptown, but we got that. So where are the second sets of secondary, where are the secondary centers to the city? And one obvious one, and I know this is probably unfair since actually I don't teach out there anymore, I teach at the Center City building, but out there in University City, it is a place that although it has a light rail investment, there is no there there. There's absolutely no there there. And if we wait for private enterprise to create one, we may not ever get that. So what do we need? And I know this is controversial. We need more parks. We need a park in University City. We need a park in a lot of those secondary, right? And I know, I've been around here long enough to know that parks are county business. But you know, we are 97 out of 100 in metropolitan cities in terms of park space. They're not getting the job done. And I'm not going to worry about why. I'm just saying that if parks are not on our plate, then planning has one arm tied behind their back, because you're asking the planning department to create places without the most significant place-making tool in their toolbox available to them. Mayor, did you want to say something?
No, I was just, I think, Deb, and you know this, the idea of just having large athletic fields is not a park. And what we've done is focused a lot on making sure that there are lots of organized places to play. But in our city today, we don't have the half-court basketball goals in places. We don't have a tot lot, but there's hope. If you come down Parkwood Avenue, there's a park there in Belmont that has a picnic table, a tot lot. I don't think it has a basketball goal, but it is a place where their community gathers now. And Taiwo is working with the Parks and Rec Commission on a strategic plan, and I think what we're saying is the voice that you've just articulated is often the silent voice that we need to figure out how to get in this dialogue and conversation. So we're really concerned about that, because if we're going to have all of these places that Mark said that people are going to stay, they're renewing their leases, they're millennials, they still need open spaces to play. We need leisure spaces of play. And I wanted to just ask, I'm going to ask you, you know, Deb, you've done a lot of work in our area, and Rick, I don't know you, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to help us on this. 4 or 5 years ago, the Knight Foundation talked about developing 8 to 80 cities, where cities for 8-year-olds, and there were cities, those same cities could have for 80-year-olds. I hear that parks being a component. What do you see as absolutely essential to be an 8 to 80 city, where you can have every range of the population engaged in what you were just talking about belonging? Help us think about that. I know it's park and open spaces, but what else makes that work?
And so let me circle back to that and just say this. The one thing about parks is that, you know, I think that if we're talking about urban parks, one of the things we want to do is look at them through the lens of economic mobility, and to realize that proximity is perhaps the best thing we can do in terms of economic mobility, so that if people's kids play on the same soccer teams, they go to the same schools, they shop in the same markets, they go to the same restaurants, just that proximity is good for economic mobility. And whether that's on a main street or in a park, that's what we want to try to achieve. Relative to 880 cities, what I read about the grain of America and what millennials want, they're not different at all. They're about where they can spend their leisure time. And it goes back to the quality of life. The differentiation that I see by what I read is that the elderly generation, actually elderly, I guess me, older, cares more about natural resources, where millennials care more about built resources, because they might want the vibrancy a little bit more. But what both groups want is walkability. So they don't, they might all want to live, a lot of them may want to move to the suburbs, but what they want is suburbs that are walkable, where where there's transit and where there's different housing types, so that when I want to downsize, I can move down to the street to stay in my neighborhood, but a smaller unit. And that goes back to that exclusionary zoning of single family, because it doesn't allow for those kind of places where we can walk and mix. And so I think what defines an 880 community is choice.
I think I'd add to that on the walkability and accessibility. It's really no mystery the largest trend that we've seen really across the United States in commercial real estate has been live, work, play. And live, work, play communities in whether they're office developments or, we've even seen that spread into other forms of development. Like, Mark was mentioning the Villages, which was really one of the first retirement communities where, again, this live, work, play concept is just abound. But we've seen that be something that's very attractive to companies, from a law firm perspective, to be able to walk downstairs and have lunch. We've done the studies to show law firms, for instance, that if they don't have to go off-site for lunch, that it's, you save that many more billable hours or whatever. But I think that it's been pretty pervasive, and it has been not only a millennial, I think, driven concept. People are, you have a group of people that are spending more time working, so the ability to just go get a quick workout, grab a quick bite to eat, or have a beer with the team after work has become increasingly important and valued. And I see, when I talk to CEOs and CFOs, one of the things they do is they look at it as a part of their benefits package. So they're really kind of saying, look, this, while it's a $5 a foot premium, I'm really, otherwise I've got to do all kinds of things. And conversely, as that space has gotten more expensive, and I deal with someone who says, look, we probably can't afford to go there. We're going to need to go to the suburbs, and what we're going to do is put $3 a foot towards bringing in lunches and that sort of thing. So it's really interesting to see how folks are dealing with that issue. But the live, work, play piece has been an amazing trend. I think the other thing from a cost perspective, one thing that was really interesting as the market was accelerating out of the Great Recession was that we were seeing, particularly in the Triangle, we were seeing a situation where there wasn't a lot of development. The credit markets were still really iced over. And as we started to see demand come back into the market, you could almost forecast that there was going to be very little new supply. So we saw rents go up pretty dramatically, particularly at these live, work, play spaces. And, at the same time, you will remember that everybody was pretty concerned about the recession. You're kind of looking in the rearview mirror, ooh, that was really bad. When's the next one coming? And so what I saw CFOs do, which was really kind of interesting, was density. So we saw, when you looked at the statistics, you would see a rise in rents, but yet your occupancy cost per employee was level. And that's because we just saw CFOs create this density. You started to have these cafeteria-like seating and all that sort of stuff, which is really interesting because that kind of shifted then into co-working and, you know, the entrepreneurs that I'm working with today versus 20 years ago, it's very different. I mean, these guys and gals are like, just give us a table, you know, and we'll sit 25 people at the table. I'm like, well, you know, you do have bathroom issues and you do have these kind, you know, so it's a really interesting problem that the commercial real estate and developers have had to solve. How do you know, I've got a good friend at Brown, that was CFO at Brown Software, who said it's the never cold toilet seat problem. So, you know, it's out there and it's real. So now we're, you know, as cities, we need to be thinking about that, not only from the perspective of bathrooms and that sort of thing, but also from the perspective of HVAC loads on buildings, you know, things that are challenging. So just one thing I could throw in there as a commercial real estate guy alongside of my colleague here.
Victoria, you got a question? Maybe access to a mic.
Can you talk a little bit about, as we try to wrestle with quality of life and maintaining and increasing quality of life so that we can attract and retain business, can you talk about maybe some innovation in the tax increment or in the tax incentive space? How do we incent businesses to not only come, but to invest in that community quality of life piece? Have there been any new movements in how we attract business in that way?
I think so. I mean, I think one, incentives are kind of a necessary evil, if you will, at times. I mean, I'm going to share a little bit about a conversation I had recently with a very high-ranking household name real estate person. And he was talking, we were having a conversation over dinner, and I was asking the question of, is it good to be in the paper receiving incentives? You know, and particularly if you're a company that's making, you know, a lot of money. And so we were having the conversation, and, you know, he said, you know, philosophically, I hadn't really thought about that. And I said, well, I kind of felt like Amazon's headquarters debacle kind of changed that, right? I mean, it started off as a, you know, kind of a intriguing, oh, look at them, they're looking for, and then it just kind of became, I think, really poorly received. You know, you had a lot of people spending a lot of time and energy. It was like the world's worst beauty contest or something, you know, that it obviously didn't do well, relatively speaking, in the press after that all went down. And then you had several other high profile incentive packages that I think were not well received publicly, you know, and again, just, you know, people saying, why do these companies that are making all this money need that? And so it was interesting. His particular take was, you know, we are competitive, so, you know, it's hard not to look at incentives when your competitors are playing in the incentive market, but we also feel like we're making decisions to be in places for more than just those incentives. And I do think, too, you know, you make a great point, and I think that it's probably incumbent on the folks that are cutting those deals that they really act on the community side of it. You know, in other words, you know, these companies want to get involved, a lot of them, but they're new to the area. So to some extent, you know, they have to figure out how to get involved in our community. You know, when I'm working with folks, I will try and point them to kind of the local ecosystem, if you will, that might jive with where they are, what they do. You know, like we have several good programs out at NC State at Centennial Campus where they work hand in hand with the companies that are there on research. So, and also CED is another good example for us, the Council for Entrepreneurial Development, which really kind of serves as our regional entrepreneurial facilitation organization. You know, they're not just the chamber of this particular community, they're working on a regional basis to try and drive value, and they definitely benefit from these larger companies that come in and they'll grab their CTO and have them speak or something like that. The mentorship. I think it's really, I like your question because I also think it points to making sure that you're nourishing ecosystems in the community, whatever they may be. And I'm sure Charlotte has a lot through the financial industry that's so strong in Charlotte, but that's an area too where you start to look at, okay, what should we be nourishing? I know that coming out of the Great Recession, one of the things I saw, having been doing what I had been doing for almost 20 years at that point, I saw a lot of really good entrepreneurs who couldn't get any funding. And so I worked with a group and we established what's called Triangle Angel Partners. And that's a classic example, right, of an ecosystem where you have angel capital. And this is like another place when you have really good success stories, really people that sell their business for $400 million or something like that. It's really important to keep those people involved, right? Sure, take a vacation, do what you're going to do, but come back into the community and give back. And I think a lot of them want to do that. I think that there could be a better bridge for cities to help them do that, to make sure that there are organizations, that there are angel capital, that there is venture capital, that you're attracting those types of groups that are going to then be reinvesting in the city and passing it forward.
The term walkability was just brought up, and Richard, last week I spent some time in Raleigh, and I asked the Lyft driver to take the long way back from dinner to the hotel, and he drove me through the Six Forks Road area. And one of the things that I noticed is, not just there, but really across Raleigh, including the downtown area, that y'all are really able to develop property with activated ground floor retail. And Deb, you know that in Charlotte, that is not something that we have been able to do very well. And I think we need to, if we want to have a more less segregated city. Why y'all able to do that so relatively well, in my opinion?
Yeah.
And why aren't we, and how do we fix that here in Charlotte?
You go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll start by saying it's probably no mystery to this room the challenges that have happened in retail in general, right? We're seeing a tremendous shift, obviously. You can have anything in 2 days, right? Some of it in 1 day. So that is undoubtedly really impacted the retail world. And I think we're seeing a shift now to experiential retail. If any of you have thrown at Urban Axes or the golf stuff, I mean, it's interesting kind of to see how things are changing. So the first thing I would say is that is a product type that is certainly under transition. And I think that it's more challenging, right? When you get out into, I mean, if you think it's bad in Charlotte, drive to some of the communities between the Triangle and the beach, right? I mean, some of the parts of North Carolina, I took a tour with Capital Broadcasting as they were developing some property, and I was stunned by the impact that Amazon and some of these things have had on that retail. So I think that it's really important to kind of rethink that retail, to make sure that because there are certain things that are not a part of the internet economy yet, and there are certain things where people value relationships, whether it's insurance or accounting or drive up, get your car fixed, whatever it is. So I think it's important to look at those things and figure out what is working and then replicate some of that in Charlotte. I think in that section of town that you're mentioning in Six Forks, that's it's a wealthier area, and that's a corridor that has seen a lot of good development. The Kane development, the Midtown in Raleigh, North Hills is one of our showpieces, if you will, in the Triangle. So you kind of hit a good area there, but I'll let you speak to Charlotte if you want. I know you've got.
Well, the downtown area too was much more than ours.
So Deb, and then a question from Renee.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I have always heard through the marketing folks is that Charlotte is over-retailed, and we have more retail space than we have need. And it's getting worse because of the national trends of online shopping. So I think the solution is perhaps not so much to try to solve the problem with retail, but try to figure out what other uses might be able to activate the street front. And, you know, to go to less traditional sources like, I mean, you know, the panacea is always, well, let's have artists. But I think, though, you know, there's an aversion to them because of their ability to pay and how long they'll be there and short-term leases. But I think the city can get behind some of that and working with developers to try to find some sort of assistance so that it's not so much of an unknown. But I do think we have to widen what it means to activate a street than retail. Just don't think we have enough of it anymore.
Dave, before we leave that question, I'd be interested to hear, and I don't know before we switch off of that question, I'd be interested to hear Deb's take or anybody's take. I don't know how familiar you are with Uptown Charlotte. Overstreet Mall is part of the reason that we have. There's a ton of retail in Uptown, but if you don't work in one of those buildings, you probably don't know Overstreet Mall is there. A lot of visitors think there's no retail, and they wouldn't have any idea all the things that you could buy if you get into that little network of tunnels of sorts. So is that holding us back, and is there some way to kind of reverse that and have it be more outward facing, still an amenity and accessible to the people in those buildings who enjoy it and utilize it, but more outward facing to the community?
Well, it certainly has been a discussion on the radar for about 20 years now. And, you know, you go up there and you walk through the Overstreet Mall, and it's a nice upfit. And so I don't know how you de-incentivize that from happening, but it is definitely having a negative effect on the streetscape.
We've got about 15 minutes to wind this up. We'll take another break and then go to the last big segment.
Richard, one of the things you said as far as rent is that we're lower than Silicon Valley, which is not a great goal, you know. So if we're not Silicon Valley 2.0, there's another slide that said that the average home price is above what the area median income is, or what people can afford to buy. So how do we as a city, is there a way to balance that out? Are the landlords driving the housing market, or what are there strategies that can be done from our seats to help balance this out?
Well, I think, first of all, to just kind of address your first point, I think it's a good thing to be less expensive than some of the first-tier markets. I mean, that is, in effect, what is driving a lot of the growth that we have down here in the Triangle, because it's so much more cost-effective to establish an office. So, for instance, I will pretty regularly see business owners from New Jersey, from New York, from Boston, even DC, that are wanting to come to the Triangle or down to the South because the number one, the skilled labor that we've talked about earlier, but also because that cost of living. So they know, gosh, I can open up an office here and it's that much less expensive, and I've got all these great resumes that are coming in. So I think in the near term, that's a good thing for Charlotte. It's a good thing for the Triangle to be more cost effective from a business perspective, rents-wise. I think some of the challenges that you talk about in having affordable housing and that sort of thing, you know, part of the challenge that you have when the economy is good, and we've had this nice long run, is that everybody's employed, you know. So the cost of labor, construction costs, all these things are up dramatically. And that is one thing that a lot of people don't realize in commercial real estate, is that, you know, the cost of building these things moves. In good times, it's really expensive to build new buildings or houses because everybody's employed. And in this particular cycle, I think we're seeing a high degree of construction labor You know, I mean, because you know, you got multifamily is booming, you've got residential booming, and then you've got office and other development booming. So this is one of those really challenging times where it is going to be more expensive to build and therefore more difficult to make it affordable. And then you couple that in this particular cycle again, I want to remark that you know, we were in an extended period of time where demand had returned to the markets and no new supply was coming on the market. And that, you know, when I you know, just kind of baseline it out for people who aren't in my industry, that's what I try and explain. And that's why we have seen 20+% appreciation in rents through this cycle. And as I was talking to our panelists beforehand, help is on the way. I think, and I say this in the Triangle, and I know, again, very similar markets, we are finally starting to see enough development that I think that in 3 or 4 quarters, we're going to see winners and losers again. So we will see some, but I think it's a challenging problem that you're facing. And I want to just reiterate some of the market forces that are causing that to be as challenging as it is right now.
So do you think increasing the demand, to continue to increase the demand, will balance out the housing costs? I mean, I know that's the
Well, I think at
concept.
some point, you know, at some point the economy is going to turn. And Mark is the guy that's making those predictions, right? But I think at some point that will taper down, you know. But right now, I mean, between, you know, the trade wars and challenges that we've got there to materials costs, it's, you know, I've just seen the numbers that our project development services group, construction managers put out, and not only are you seeing much more expensive raw materials for buildings and for houses, but then you add to that the labor and the phenomenon that we're seeing in terms of it being pervasive across all development. You know, it's in past cycles, in other words, you know, take Durham, for instance, you know, it always seemed like in the city of Durham, they were developing one product type or the other. You know, they had this massive boom with American Tobacco where they developed a lot of office, and then all of a sudden they stopped developing office and they developed all this multifamily. And so that allows for your construction labor and things like that to ebb and flow. I think the challenge that we're seeing in this particular cycle is it's widespread.
So our last question. Deb, I'll address this to you. What's the biggest challenge Charlotte may need to address in order to build a great city?
A little bit of a long answer to start with. A short topic is global warming, or the climate crisis, or the environmental crisis, which is looming. You know, the city is doing such a great thing in terms of its support for the circular economy and addressing what the carbon footprint might be. But I think that what we don't do is see how that affects our day-to-day workings. And what I want to talk about just for a little bit is the relationship between the climate crisis and our rezonings. Because to me, they are directly linked. So, you know, when a rezoning comes in, then what people are concerned about are property values, because they're concerned that, you know, a mix of housing types will somehow drive their property values down, which is absolutely not true, but they don't know that. School overcrowding and traffic, those are the 3 things they're concerned about, and unfortunately the 3 things that we spend way too much time talking about. We don't ask what the carbon footprint of a new development might be. And we could easily do that as one of the ways in which we evaluate whether we want a development to happen or not. We spend far too much time talking about mitigating traffic, and in fact, when we mitigate it, we increase our carbon footprint. And what I want to say is that no city has ever solved traffic, nobody ever will. And so if you think about Rome, Paris, San Francisco, New York City, you know, you don't go to those places because you think I can drive through them as efficiently as possible. That's not why you go to a city. And so you ask yourself, what are the reasons that I'm going to those cities? What is the quality of the environment there? And it has usually nothing to do with traffic. We put up with it because of all the other good stuff that happens. But we don't ask about that in our rezonings. So what I would ask is for a conversation in terms of rezonings that are more about experience and efficiency. What experience does this new development, what experience does this new development create? And so can we have a walkability score? Does this new proposed development in some way contribute to walkability or sociability or economic mobility because of its proximity to other things? We have a tendency to say if we have apartments, then other new apartments will be good right beside it. So whenever we start rezoning because of sameness rather than diversity, then we're not getting to the thing that we want in terms of a mixed community. The tree ordinance, we need shade, and we're going to need a lot of it. Is it aggressive enough in terms of the context of the climate crisis? Water collection, local food, all those things which I know we're beginning to talk about, but we're at a crisis point, and so now we have to do something. So anyway, what I would suggest about all of this is that we have yet to make that link between our goals for the city and our rezonings. And I think we can if we, again, reorient our thinking from one of efficiency to one of experience and one of quality of life.
Into the mic.
So I think that's an interesting question. It's this chicken and egg that we constantly get into, because we do talk about it. It's just not baked into our process. Mm-hmm. And so we're in this position of saying to neighbors, well, yeah, but if we don't build there, you're not going to get a sidewalk because we need the density of people there to build the sidewalk, and that comes later. Is there a different way to do that, the other way around, that you can say? We talked about this with transit. Maybe we say, let's focus on our transit routes, but how do you flip that on its head?
Well, I think, this new lens that we've adopted in terms of economic mobility really changes that conversation. Because if we don't, have that sort of diversity, then we can't, that diversity across the city, then we can't achieve what we're trying to achieve. And the issue of, here's the thing, the issue of density and people being scared of it, again, you're almost always hearing from homeowners, not the future renters that will be that. And so it's an unbalanced conversation because not everybody's at the table.
Yeah.
So we're almost at time, but we have a bonus question. I'm getting the yes, no.
Oh, there's
yes.
a bonus question?
Yes, a bonus question.
Oh.
It does
didn't
not
tell-
involve agriculture. So,
Okay.
and it is this, and I'm going to see if I can ask this in a way that makes sense. So we remember the evils of, well, certainly the evils of separate but equal, right? But there is a different phrase or frame around this of different but equal or equitable or accessible. So as we talk about different parts of a city developing in different ways to meet different needs of different types of companies or neighbors or what have you, what have you seen or what would you recommend to either do or not do as we think about how you develop or incent development in one part of town versus a different part of town in a way that makes sense without it being inequitable or unfair? So Rich, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think this is great because I was thinking about what my parting thoughts would be or a couple tips, but this segues right into it. I think, when I can use, again, the non-threatening triangle guy, when I can use Durham as an example, we all know that we've seen a tremendous renaissance in Durham, which was a place that I've loved for a long time. It has great DNA. Great restaurants. There was a great artistic kind of class in Durham for many, many years. But the office market was just absolutely stagnant. Obviously, Capital Broadcasting came in, Jim Goodman, and made a huge investment in American Tobacco. And American Tobacco has really become the heart, if you will, that's beating and allowing more blood to get to other parts of the city is kind of how I would describe it. So, what they did there was amazing from a public-private partnership perspective. And obviously there were National Park Service, there were tax credits and that sort of thing on the upfits that really led to a competitive advantage for that development. But because there was so much historic product down there, that became kind of a pervasive technique to use those tax credits and achieve again allowances that were probably 33% above what were happening in the suburban parts of the city. So I would say, and when I look at kind of who was involved, and Mayor Bell and a guy like Bill Kelkoff, who was leading the Downtown Durham Inc. They had a very good machine for these public-private partnerships, and I talked about. I kind of kicked it off with balance. I think that there was a lot of balance around what they knew that they needed to get some of these, get the heart built, and then get some of these arteries built, and then extend out into these communities. And I think the other effort that was done is how do we get some of these companies that are coming in to be employing local folks, and not just gentrifying a lot of these neighborhoods. So I think that that's really important. And I think if I were, the developers would stone me on my way to the car if I didn't share one of the challenges that they see in working with city councils is kind of the Charlie Brown Lucy effect, where Lucy puts the ball down and then pulls the ball up. Yeah. When I talk to developers, they find it just gets increasingly difficult to know what they need to do to appease council and municipalities to drive forward a development. So, and I think it's logical, right, that as we are evolving as a city, that you would start to ask for more, right? Hey, we want you to put in more sidewalks, we want you to put in more of this, or we want you to do more affordable housing in this community. And I think all of that is noble, right? I mean, that's what your jobs are in many respects. But I think that it's if I could say one thing, it's important to understand, the plight of the developer, right? That what they're trying to do, what the numbers are, having that basic understanding, such that the asks can be bridged with what ultimately is going to be developed. And I think, again, Durham's a great, an absolutely great example of that, where there were very thoughtful steps on the front side to drive a significant employment and high growth technology and services companies, to then have that start to jump out. And I'll tell you, every single project that occurred, there were naysayers. And I cut my teeth in Durham. I do a tremendous amount of work in downtown Durham, and I used to, get swinging in these debates with a lot of commercial real estate professionals that said, oh, it's just, American Tobacco is the Disneyland. No, it's not. And we have seen, projects like Golden Belt, which is another converted warehouse, be extremely successful. Nobody said that project was going to be successful. But what we have seen is that as we've moved out from those public-private partnerships, we're replicating what we did well there. And then, of course, obviously, as the city evolves, there's less of a need for incentives. There's less of a need for that sort of thing. But I think it's critical to never take your eye off the ball either. It's important not to forget how you created some of the prosperity in some of these places, and let that translate now as you work out through the city.
Yep.
So remember, right before the 2040 plan started, Mitch Silver came to town, and he said we were a deal-making city rather than a plan-making city. And it spoke directly to that criticism, is that it was always a negotiation because we didn't really state well enough what we wanted. And so I know with Taiwo's effort, the idea is to be much clearer about what our expectations are and to and that they rise at the same time, because we're not the needy little city we used to be. I mean, we're a city that has choices now, and so we can raise our expectations, but we do have to be fair about what they are so people know coming into that. What I would end with is something that I like to say is that, in Charlotte we have a diversity of neighborhoods, but we don't have diversity within neighborhoods. And, if we want to get to where we want to go, which I think most of us agree on what that is, then we have to strive for diversity within neighborhoods using all the tools we have in order to do that. And again, we've got a great staff here in Charlotte, and they can do great things if we're clear about what we want them to do. And then when they do it, that you stand behind them and take the heat so that they don't have to. Because I know that there's sort of like a culture of fear and failure. And there's too many good people with great ideas that I think you've got all the tools in place to do all the things you want to do. And it's just, being a little bit more comfortable with risk.
Risk, I think we've heard that before today. Any other questions for our panel? All right, well, Ed.
We have a history in Charlotte of a very challenging development process, and developers have often said to me, it takes a long time, there's a lot of uncertainty, plan review, inspections, things like that. So I'm wondering, how big a difference does that make to the attractiveness of Charlotte as a place to invest? And as a corollary to that, if we relax some of those, speed up the process in situations where we want to provide incentives for affordable housing, how much of a difference can we make there that would motivate people to invest in affordable housing instead of what they might have done otherwise?
So what I would say is that the development process in Charlotte is not that difficult compared to other cities. And I understand they want you to believe that, but it's not. And I think that in order to get the city that you want, then it's going to be a process which, favors the city. I mean, we've been so pro-development for so long. And so I think that's kind of crocodile tears on that one. And I understand.
I think the pro-development thing, we want jobs and so on, but this is just process where they say the completion time, for example, to get through inspections and all of that is highly uncertain. And I heard it again recently from a developer down in my district.
And I'm sure you did, and I'm sure they think that, but if they were honest, they would probably tell you in other cities they spend more time. So, I mean, if you wanted to do a study of that, I think you'd find that our process is certainly not streamlined, but democracy is not meant to be. So, anyway, that's just me from my Planning Commission standpoint.
So if I can just weigh in for a second, Ed, that might be yet another how might we, because we may not be any worse than other cities, but what if we were significantly better? Would that be more attractive? Now, I have no idea what the answer is.
Well, I'm just wondering how big a difference it makes, basically. We did a study, the Gartner study. We did it a few years ago, and it found a whole bunch of things in the interaction between the city and the county that it thought were not ideal. We've worked on it. I think we've made some progress, but there is still a kind of recurring theme. And really the question is, you're saying it's not that big a deal in the sense of we're not that bad. I'm just wondering how much difference does it make? Like if people decide they want to come here, are they going to decide not to because they perceive this as a place that's not welcoming and friendly to developers?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to give a little bit more of a tempered answer. I think there's an old adage that developers develop, and I think that Charlotte developers are going to continue to develop, whether the city is difficult to deal with or the city is easy to deal with. I think that it is absolutely your responsibility as leaders to try and be easy to deal with, try and be, pro-business. I mean, as that one philosopher says, regulate me gently. And obviously you need regulations, but I think that it's important. What I would do is I would be doing the studies that our moderator is suggesting. How do you compare to other municipalities? How do you compare to the Triangle in terms of how long it's taking to get a permit? Do you have a fast track process? I think it's absolutely relevant to hold charrettes on the topic. One of the things I used to do for Bill Kalkoff in Durham was I would say, you should get these 7 people in the room to talk to some of your developers. Because in Durham, there were some less sophisticated or less experienced developers, I should say, that could really stand to benefit from the REITs and the more experienced players. And that was something that we really wanted to do. But the same thing can be held, if you had a safe place, whether it's a third-party survey or something, you would learn things that the development community finds to be challenging. And I think you could hone in at least on the top 2 or 3 things that they find most onerous. But I think back to the second part of your question on affordable housing. I mean, I think that, again, the biggest thing to affordable housing is ensuring that the project is still viable, right? So yeah, you want to get to the place where you're getting affordable housing and things that you want, but you don't want to outkick your coverage. You want to know kind of what you can get, what the development will allow, and not be working the developer back from a place where they've got to bring spreadsheets and show it's just not going to work.
And let me just say, I think that's really fair. I mean, I've seen an awful lot of it where there'll be a proposal for multifamily housing and it's 6 stories tall, and the neighborhood will go, we're only comfortable with 4. And that's just going to completely screw up their pro forma, because they need all 6 stories in order to make the project work. And so, the neighborhood people don't necessarily recognize the complexities of what it takes to knock off 2 stories from a project. And so I think that, we strive so hard to make sure homeowners that are 5 blocks away are happy when, it's not really an informed conversation. And I just think, in terms of civic engagement, which we all believe in, we just need to make sure there's an education component to it as well.
All right, any other questions? All right, if you would, let's thank our panel. So we're going to take call it a 20-minute break. Rich, I think you have to leave us.
Yeah, I got to get on.
Okay, Deb will. Okay, perfect. So we'll take a 20-minute break.
It's cold again.
We'll come back. We're going to dive back. We're going to spend the rest of the afternoon diving back into our goals and then starting to get more granular with those around categories, timings, and so forth. And I think Deb's going to stay with us for the afternoon. So see you back in 20.
Yeah, it's cold.
Great outside, we probably way less than.
That's might be true. Same reason they can lean back in their chairs.
Dad, you did a great job. Yes. too.
Say ever. Let's do them the whole one. Hey, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty. Yes, sir. That's right.
And like, then they start to go, oh, okay. So I do think
Oh my. Yeah. Yeah. You just laid out there. I love that. I love that about you. We gotta come work for that. Oh, she went out about the parks. I was like, oh my. Oh yeah, that was her first comment, was about parks.
well, good luck. Good luck in your planning when it's done.
Hey, well, oh well. Oh yeah, she's like, no sir. Have a seat. Have a seat. Sit down.
JCC and others. So when you get that, I'll send it to you. And then you can. Well, you know, you get into all these environmental things and all that, climate science. I think there are a lot of things that the community pertaining to. There are a lot of that's different. At the same time. So, what was supposed to happen is that first project with West Lane tolling is going to be the starter project in Charlotte, the toll lanes, express lanes. And then it ran into all kinds of issues in '77 and ended up going ahead. And that became this whole big thing. So the idea was going to be, look at, they don't bite you, they're good, they save you time and money on this little charter project that nobody would have, but it didn't happen. But now that 77 is open, everybody, a lot of people are going to see it. I like it a lot. I mean, then of course there's public comments and in that process. So my big concern is these people that talking about no kidding. It's like Frogger and those people like walking across. You talking about walking across, or you're talking about driving across? Yeah, yeah. So walking across and jumping over the median, crazy. And it's nuts. And I think we had in the past 3 years ago. Doing that, and not to say that. So it's kind of this fine line. But at the same time, I know that that's something that's been in the news. That's my concern. I know that we also see that areas where type bridges. So I don't know if there's other options. I think we discussed that would cost us. We'd have to take out bonds for that. And like going there, even well, you have to get an ADA compliant too, so you're doing this whole. Like in popular areas where people cross the street, usually what they serve as is covered for when it rains, and they walk under it. Like I'm wondering, so a couple of things. One is certainly, I guess the question is are those two, they pay space two? I don't know. So it's like it depends. I don't know so much. He may how often do you have that? I mean, I don't know if it's one particular area where everybody's doing it, or if it's all over. You know, like I said, it's like, what are you going to put like a bridge every 500 feet? Because people don't want to walk more than 500 feet to get to a crossing.
Is this like afternoon yoga you're doing?
I never have been able to sit still.
And it seems to me like people are just walking across or whatever. I don't know. All bus stop. But then I guess you look at what are the options. So if you don't have a car, then how do you get to the bus stop? Yeah.
And so it does.
So Patrick, we kind of need to go out and see Durham, I think. You hear about all of this.
downside of being here is that this really isn't Durham. It's Duke.
I know. I was just thinking that. He was talking about that. I'm like, gosh, I want to see that. I don't know what he's talking about.
When I had heard that it was going to be the Washington Duke, so it'd be great if it was just at the Civic Center downtown. The Marriott's on top of the Civic Center, so you've got the rooms and you've got the spaces and everything, and then you've got everything from the ballpark.
Because that's kind of the point of going to another city. Maybe we should just have a field trip tonight.
Yeah, that might not be a bad thing.
I reached out to, were you there when we were talking about this drummer, Kobe Watkins? So he's a local here, but I heard him in Charlotte, and I followed him on Twitter. So I said, Kobe, are you playing anywhere? He said he might be playing tomorrow night at Kingfisher.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
He said it's a great post-works drink place. So he wasn't sure if he was playing there or not, but I think that's what we need to do.
It is. I mean, it's nice here, but yeah, if you were going to Durham, I would recommend going to the convention center, and the hotel's right on top of the convention center.
Yeah.
And then you're in the middle of everything.
Yeah,
And
I mean, that's
very
what we should do. I might have to get a little field trip out tonight.
Yeah, that would be a good thing for sure.
Actually, because the well, they're very. I think you're better off preventing than providing. At least if you put up Ped Bridge or something, but then you prevented people from probably have to use that,
It's coming down to 77 is all set up.
Yes.
That's fine. This is a nice action.
Yeah. South. Yes. Well, you know what would happen if you got in that lane? If you got in that lane, we would just take a picture of license plate and send you like a bill for like 50 cents. Yeah. It wouldn't have been that much. Mind to say it? No. It shows you on the sign. From there, most of it might be $1.20 or something like that.
I wonder what the I guess what I'm accustomed to toll roads is kind of like it's a separate road.
Right. Yeah. You'll never see that again. It's just all high speed. You know, it's dangerous having toll booths and all that stuff, stopping traffic and going through all, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
My wife and I were in Florida.
Yeah.
It's like swimming from Orlando to just south of Florida, taking a beach area.
Yeah.
Good luck avoiding toll roads there.
I-4 and all that, yeah.
We didn't realize it so as we came to the toll booth, no one was there. We had no change.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's also, we don't have chicken. But look here, people are so nice around here. So we did.
Projector certainly doesn't help.
Nice.
Feels like you
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Well, you know, there's all kinds of those things worked in. But if you were there, you'd have a easy pass or peach pass or whatever pass, fast pass type of thing, and you just scoot on through. I mean, once that whole network in Charlotte was built, 77, 40, 74, I mean, when Monroe bypass, people say that half an hour now. Yeah. I think their annual program for construction is like $20 billion, where North Carolina's like $4 billion. Oh yeah. Yeah, coffee. What's the next thing on your agenda? I think so. That's right. Well,
This is so cute.
are the freshmen in the front? Yeah, that's right. Any snacks to prevent that? Eat, yeah. I was gonna say. Yeah, right.
That little snack room is going to be the death of me. Very cool. I keep going back. I'm glad it's a little bit further away at least. You do. You have plenty of time to go, do I really need to be doing this? I used to be. Yeah. I loved crafts. I used to paint. I just don't have just time, I guess. I don't know why. Baseball. You go to watch baseball? Do you? That's on my bucket list, actually, because I love beer. Really? Huh. Really? Yeah. Yeah.
You teaching yourself how to braid.
In college, in the sorority house, I was the French braider, so.
Oh, wow.
Everyone come to me to French braid their hair.
I saw you had the rhythm going there.
I know.
You know, I don't know how to French braid. I can braid, but I don't know how to French braid. It's a finger thing that I can't.
That you can't do? I have to do something with my hands.
I plait. I don't braid.
Plaiting's kind of the same thing, though.
It is, but it's the function of the hand that I can't.
Yeah.
You move your hands a different way.
Okay.
It's like you go plaiting, you just be going like this, and braiding, you gotta kind of go in and out like a maypole or something. I can't get it straight.
I guess I don't know plaiting then, because I thought it was kind of the same thing.
If you look at like Victoria has a braid, I can't braid close to the head like that.
Okay.
The way Donata's is, hers are braided, but they're still plaits.
Oh, okay.
They hang loose. The plait are hanging loose.
We're
away
talking
from
about,
the head.
yeah. We're talking about the difference between braiding and plaiting. Heavy things.
I thought you.
Oh.
Some of yours is plait.
Flat to the scalp.
You braid
A braid. No, these are braids.
Those are braids.
Flat to the. I'm
See,
calling my mother.
plaiting is like French braids.
That's what I.
That
That's
you
what I.
you braid to the scalp.
If you take this to the discussion, it's going to have the next group. If you look up there, we're going to do that.
And Park will be the one, you'll do tape, and Park will do work first.
Okay.
Mom.
Flat to the scalp or braid to the scalp. I'm back. Just like games.
I don't know of anyone who's gotten tripped up because they
Yes.
I mean, most of them are going to be evil related. But it's, I know I'm still teaching one that's in Manhattan. Yeah, I don't think I'm certified. It has to be a quote. But that might not be a bad thing. Given how big we are, that we can't do something locally for all the competition. I've not looked into that at all. coming up right around 30, but you rode that thing 38, 39, get that old George Jefferson love, and let it go. That's right. Oh, it's still good. It's just a little this way. You just don't tilt your head like that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I saw a picture right around the time I became manager around 36 or 37. And everyone is about 38 or 39. And I was like, wow, that's about
Yes, yes.
37. Yeah. Well, I mean, the first time you do it, it's sort of like, oh, what did I get?
Yeah.
Wasn't that bad kind of thing. But now that I'm further removed, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, you need to go ahead and pick that up.
Yeah. Braxton, I see you thinking a little bit in the back.
Manager, yeah, that was a weird time. That was a weird time. I was an assistant city attorney. In fact, how it came about was that I was the negotiator between the city manager and the council as they were divorcing each other and trying to keep them from killing each other. And I still don't know that because I wasn't asking for it at all, nor had I zero city management experience. But at that time, I think it was more the people that I knew and my ability to sort of rally through and inspire folks. Our big thing was get morale back up. Because at that point it would have been difficult. I mean, Durham was perceived as a bad place to work if you're a city manager. So me going in, kind of helping get it straight, and then when the city attorney retired, I went back. I was like, yeah, I'm good. This whole thing is, it's in a better spot, but I gotta go back home. So.
Yeah.
Is this? Yeah, yeah.
In classic innovation form, you guys ready to rock? I hear some of your voices say yes, but your eyes tell me otherwise. So, now, if you are ready to rock and roll, here's the deal. Again, in true innovation fashion, here was our plan for the afternoon. Here's what we're going to do based on where we are now and the outputs and outcomes we want to get to today, and then also how it leads into tomorrow. So, as you certainly remember, this morning went around the horn just articulating goals out loud. Then we started getting a little more granular with medium impact, high impact, a couple low impact. Thanks to Renee and Victoria, we've categorized the high impact ones. Thanks to Eastland Ed, we categorized the medium impact ones. But now we want to take a slightly different approach, basically as we continue to explore these things, but also to ensure we get to meaningful outputs and useful and usable outputs. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to work in 3 teams. The teams have already been identified by leader and by teammates. What we're going to ask you to do is to, for your particular area theme, or what are we calling those 3 things? You have a term for them? No, the 3, just 3 groups. Okay, I don't know if they were themes or what have you. I want to use your language. The 3 themes, so the members of those 3 teams are organized around those 3 themes. You're going to come up and select all the goals that you think relate to that. So for example, we've got a theme around neighborhoods. Great neighborhoods, which would be Malcolm, Victoria, and Larkin. We're going to have a group around TAPE, which is Transportation and Planning and Environment, which is Matt, Julie, Renee, and Ed. And then a group around workforce development, which would be Dimple, Braxton, and Tark. You'll come up, grab the goals that relate to your theme, and then you're going to have 45-minute to an hour-long working session within your team. So 3 groups working in parallel. Your task, your mission is to consolidate as needed, write up or draft the description of the 1 or 2 or 3 areas that you consolidate into under your theme. And then if you have specific policy questions around that, define those. In terms of what management support might be needed to make progress on that goal, that theme, that topic, capture that. Also consider and articulate how might we engage influencers, right? Citizens, developers, whomever. And then lastly, when we're done with our working time, we'll have each group report out no more than their top 3, right? So if you think about you're consolidating into 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you're going to report out in your top 3. Most likely with the time you have, you're not going to have time to dig into all this for more than 3. But that's what we're assuming based on what we think is ahead of you based on this template. So let me pause here and ask any questions about what we're asking you to do. We'll start off with 45 minutes. If we need an extra 15, then we'll extend it.
So the exercise, so we have 3 groups. We go with our group, and we want to take ideas that are up here, consolidate them however they relate,
yep,
and create a plan, a policy. What is the outcome
yep.
of this?
So, no, we're not creating. You're not creating. I think you're trying to define for tomorrow when we go into the grid of what's effective. I'm sorry. I think what we're trying to look at is enough preparation and definition. So example, there's up there small businesses, strategize. Well, what does that really mean in the context of what we've been trying to do, and list that out. So a description would be, we strategize on small business by, and you've heard the discussions today. I think Malcolm's discussion was, well, how do we ensure success, grow small, the number, what are the city's policies around that? And just get all of that together in your description. And then really, at your description, what is the real policy question in the initiative? And then what is the management support, research, background, scan, whatever, to get it done? And then how are you going to engage the people that are important to doing that? And it's not going to be perfect, but it's a stab at something that I think that would take us from all the sticky notes to something that might be manageable under each of these categories for tomorrow. So you're trying to get us to the next step. Does that make sense? Is that better, Braxton, for a better description?
Thank you.
Okay, and there will be staff people to join you at the tables too. Okay, so can we get our sticky notes and bring them over?
So that's the first thing is to decide which of the 3 tables you're going to work out of the 4 you have available to you. And you've got, right, the whiteboards and the large flip chart sheets available to you. If you need more, we've got more of those, but you just got to decide which tables, who's going to work at which tables. We have Deb. We also have some of the staff who'll be joining your teams.
It's no big deal if somebody
So how are we organizing these? We say
consolidating the topics submitted, draft a description of it, define policy questions, define what support we need, and how to engage in answers.
Okay. Thank you for your collaboration. Several things on here.
So let's try to combine now, like let's start with transportation mobility and see if we can narrow it down. Yeah. So, yeah, I know.
Investigate industry and still create how the paper mobility a bunch of skills. Here's another one for fun. That one's fun. I know I had one that was fun. So what you're saying is
So develop.
because I think we have been, so you asked me from the past. We are part of the plan, the 2030 plan, and again, we'll have some sales, but that's a transit plan. A lot of what you have, are talking about walkability and pedestrian.
This plan would include, so we would look at it on certain walkability, certain alternatives to transportation. You know, talk about the future, at the same time too, maybe the present. We talked about greenways as a mode of transportation, but that all would be like that.
So it would include things like what are the gaps in the sidewalk,
But is that superseding
I don't think it supersedes, I think we use, the 2030 plan is pretty transit. Right. So, if you're, I think what you all are trying to get to, what I'm hearing is, we're talking about a transportation plan, right? It works. I have a transit plan that I've been following, but what we're, I think we don't have is broad mobility.
Question is, if we pursue the road mobility plan, what then is the place?
I think the 2030 plan is a portion plan that, piece, because just as Ben example, I can put as many buses on the street, we can find it, but if you don't have sidewalks to connect the neighborhood to get to it, then we're missing a very big piece. Right. And so,
But we have to know what it is.
I know
be all incorporated within the comprehensive plan. Yeah.
Yeah, it informs that.
Otherwise, I think our intention is to
said, there is a certain attrition about our approvals and donations based on, this consideration, that consideration. So the danger when you don't have to meet the current planning environment is that it looks like it's case to case. And these guys are spending a lot of money on developing policies. So let's stay back on track.
First point of, let's go see.
What's that? You know, I'm good, but thanks for asking. When there's a legal issue, let me know and I will chime in and hopefully do better than last time. Is that legal? I thought about saying yes one day. Oh, yes. Thank you for not saying anything. But you're right. I did give people an opportunity to whisper something at the crickets. Like, what's hi. I thought I was multitasking. Apparently I'm only doing one thing, which is responding to an email. It's just not worth it. Yeah. Gracie has moved on. She has not shut down. That's funny.
It's not, I will say, it is my problem, it's not my responsibility, but it is. But if you think about schools, in 2002, Southwest started the discussion about where we was going to build our major transit corridor. That was basically planned at the time, and those rail corridors have been established. They're not complete. But the vast majority of our riders come from the bus each and every day. And so much of that is still free. We're not having rail corridors. Not going to happen. So we act as if it doesn't exist. So all of the rezonings and development completely outside the transit discussion. And so what I think we want to is that we start talking about these corridors and she's already said this is not just a community budget, and we have to prioritize. And so I'm using the extreme example. One of the reasons here was this is not consider should we be then maybe the issue is I'm saying that's the solution. But it's we're thinking the point is, we don't want people to walk away we need more time to we're going quick question for you. When we say the word spectrum of specific economic development, the periphery is actually deferred. Should we have just more than one spectrum of suburban versus just a range, but what is that range? And so, because the number of things, economic development. Instead of saying this is he said economic development opportunity, just a company that has jobs. But we wanted to why we didn't cover the university here. So like the two things that we want to check across is we can say the spectrum of any both large and small, not just big. That's kind of what I think. Just to make sure I don't want to be on this. Yeah, the two are still low. Yes. Well, I think it's both. So it depends on what. So we already was at that. So then how do I respond to a growing community?
objectives or the key results below those that will ultimately say that is achieved when these are done.
Usually, you're so always on point.
That doesn't sound like a good start.
And I just like to point out one time, sometimes we ask staff to do policy questions, and they don't have enough discernment from the discussion to do that. So the question that I would ask is, for the staff that's at the table, do they feel like they would be able to, or is it enough to go through 1, 2, and 3? And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a work in,
Three's
you know.
right, yeah.
So that's why I just sometimes don't like to put the staff in the position of thinking what we think.
I would love to get a response from staff on that, but I kind of agree with both of y'all that a lot of times this part of the work is absent from when we give staff the direction on the guidance of what we want. And I do agree with Tarek is that after step 2,
Maybe 3 though is fair.
yeah, it could be fair, but absent of this kind of work, what the mayor is saying is right, and then we lose a lot of time when staff comes back to us and says that's not what we wanted. So somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just like, well, my concern is if we won't have the money to do it. My concern is that I don't know that I'm willing to target a neighborhood versus be citywide. There's some big issues like that to say that, well, we want to do some things that are specific around targeting or versus comprehensive. They might be easier to do for policy direction like that versus trying to write a policy question. Just.
So with that,
Mm-hmm.
what are we gonna do?
Well, he hasn't told us yet.
I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm
Now,
looking for,
Marcus.
so Marcus?
Mhm.
So
1, 2, and 3 would be great. If through these discussions, the 3 different tables could get through 1, 2, and 3.
And that might be for one or more sort of sub-themes, for lack of a better term, within your main theme area. Is that, or are you guys all finding yourself, you're getting down to one thing?
we've got 3 things.
You got 3 things?
We're almost done with number 3. I mean, we're
For all 3?
We're 2 of our 3 objectives, so 2 of them are roughly done.
Right?
And then what we have to do is last.
Perfect. So Malcolm, is this team, are you guys sort of consolidated around one thing within your theme, or is it multiple things within your
We
theme?
can really boil it down to really 2 broad themes.
Okay.
With variables underneath them all.
Okay.
And an overriding, for the lack of a better word, I can't read. Overarching statement.
Okay.
Yeah, and so overarching statement, 2 big buckets with variables underneath them, which you
Got it.
can take into consideration 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. So for those 2 things underneath, you can get to 2 and 3 on it?
I think we did. I think we
Okay.
accomplished that.
Okay. And how about for this
Housing
team?
policy, the
Julie?
Land trust. I think staff can run with that.
We got through 1, 2, 3 pretty much. We sort of agreed that.
It's, I don't need the report out, I just want to
Oh,
see
yeah.
where you are.
Okay.
And how much more time do you need to get to a good stopping place for today? So then
Okay.
you can report out.
Yeah, no, how much more time? I mean, we got a pretty good.
We've got 1, 2, and 3 now.
Yeah.
Okay. So how much more time would be useful? 15 minutes? 15?
Yeah.
15 more minutes, you could get done and done? All right, so 15 more minutes, talk amongst yourselves, 15 more minutes, and
Let
then
me
we'll
read you what I
share
have,
among the
guys,
3
and then
groups.
see-
state, we designed a perfect small business program, or hub, a workforce hub, that took elements of Project Peace and I found two or three things that were being done, we consolidated other stuff, we partnered with all the agencies, doing policies, city, yes, to get to this. I agree, but I'm wondering is that a policy? It's almost a policy, it's to adopt those and all that. Because that's simply a set a small number of that comes in. I just think so. I think number one is it definitely needs policy, and we already have a provisions to. And then two and three really is what exactly and the resources. I think that's the answer.
So
You know what I'm saying? I mean, but like really, think about it. I mean, we don't want to go. That could support people. We could make more money. We that big of a deal outside of the connection with what you said. I would
really see if it's a problem that I know because everything is in my
without having to get into it. We don't need to be done. We just need to do it. We're going to put the share it out. She's back.
I think in practice,
So we are 2 minutes away from share.
I think we want to that we've always been doing is like,
Make the most of it.
Frankly, you can make the argument it's based on expectations of existence today, right? I mean, we've exceeded that and said, all right, we're going to create land use plans to accommodate the future. That's become a baseline, but now we don't rely on our land use plans for the different reasons that we try to justify or that we use as justifications to then continue to move forward with consistent or inconsistent to the plan. And so the question is, what is the plan? The question is, I guess in fairness, I guess I also look at it from the perspective of how much is it still worth to try to make the most use of our resources and I am a little suspect developers that come up to me and say, hey, we need more housing because we're going so fast that we can't accommodate that growth. And you ask for these other accommodations, knowing full well it's the balance of the bottom line we pay and greed in making money. Digging into that infill versus greenfield divide. And I think
It's time. Now it's time. All right, no more minutes. This is the time. We want to hear from each group where your discussion took you, particularly around your discussion of the goals for your particular theme. I think we said we were going to get to 1, 2, and 3. So this team, would you like to start us off? Awesome. Thanks for volunteering. We want you to listen and then provide your reaction. If you need to refine any of this based on your reaction.
Would it be kind of easy to do, like, thumbs up going in the right direction, or need more?
Sure.
Initial reaction.
So each group will share.
So will someone
They'll get an initial reaction
write down
from
initial
your
reactions
colleagues.
from the whole? If somebody will keep track of that.
Of the initial reaction?
Yeah. Thank you.
You need a lot.
I got a lot, I know, I gotta hold my sticky notes too.
There you go.
Okay. So, we sort of distilled the conversation, and the number one, consolidating it, is to really how do we achieve a livable and connected Charlotte through the balanced distribution of our resources. And we said that it really, it starts with the 2040 Comprehensive Vision Plan, because that's what we're working on, but we recognize that it's not done. So that's really a hard challenge for us, especially in things like rezonings, because we are trying to fly the plane while it's being remodeled and built and everything else, and that's really a challenge. And so, so what we talked about, again, if you start with the Comprehensive Vision Plan, the 2040 plan, and within that it includes both the 2030 transit plan and strategic mobility. So that's sidewalks, complete streets, scooters, greenways, and everything else. And so for the first time, all those discussions are happening together, which is great. And I don't know if Marcus is here, but shout out to Marcus for facilitating it so that those department heads can really work on that all together. So within that, defining the policy question really came down to how can we work within the framework of our policies to work towards the goals of the 2040 Vision Plan. And what we identified was that staff could come forward with some strategic measures to help guide us. 3 or 4 different things that might be a pilot program in key priority areas from a transit standpoint that would help guide us with some of the land development and the CIP issues. Again, wherever we've identified that transportation challenges exist today, we could have, staff could give us some ideas to different tools for greenfield development versus infield development. Again, when we have these rezonings that come up, maybe there would be strategies to treat them a little bit differently. And then the other area really was funding, is how much are we really talking about when we talk about a complete strategic mobility plan along with the 2030 Vision Plan. We need to be talking about, how much that's going to cost, so that we can then identify really how does that get funded, and where could that funding possibly come from. So, and the environment, that conversation about the environment, that would also be brought forward when we talk about our rezonings and whatnot. What tools can we use to be able to make sure that we're including our CAP goals and our environmental goals in our land use decisions and in the development decisions that we make. So hopefully it was a big topic. It was a lot to bite off. So did I miss anything that y'all want to comment on?
Pretty good.
So initial reaction?
Let me see if I can say this. It's a lot of stuff
Dumbfounded.
going
In the
on.
mic?
I'm sorry. We have a lot of existing processes going on that need to be coordinated, and the staff would provide strategies as a result of that coordination that would come to the council in addition to continuing to monitor our CF goals. Did I say that right?
Yes, but also to compensate for a lot of our plans that are outdated, that we're going off of plans that are 10, 20 years old, but we don't have the finalized plan that's going to get us to a different solution. So what, like Taiwo was saying, is that they could look at what will become the public draft of the 2040 Vision Plan, which would become a public draft presented in the fall, Ty, is that right? Fall of 2020 for approval in 2021, but they're working on those now, so we can get guidance from them now on what we pretty much think, like we did with the TOD, right? The TOD should have been part of the UDO, but we acknowledged that that was too big of a deal. We can't wait for the UDO to be finished. We needed the TOD, so they pulled that forward, and that gave us guidance, and we passed it. So we have the ability to maybe target 2 or 3 things that are key that staff could pull forward and give us some strategies earlier than later, yeah.
So Matt? Yeah, my understanding too that within the course of our conversation, what we identified was that there are. Can everyone hear me now? So it's my understanding too that during the course of our conversation, what we identified, particularly as it pertains to transportation, is that our departments aren't coordinating and working together, so having kind of an overarching, comprehensive transportation plan is important. Something that we probably aren't going to be able to finalize until the 2040 comprehensive plan, but in the interim, we could get guidance as we're moving forward with the departments working together to help inform us in our rezoning decisions. And then also, I think, from a planning perspective too, maybe a little bit of guidance there too. So we were talking about some strategic points on that.
Well, I think in the past the departments worked differently, but right now they are working together to really marry the goals of Liz's department and CDOT with those of John Lewis's and Katz, and with ties and planning, so that for the first time really those are being discussed together and coordinated. But how does that help us right now? That's the big question, is what tools from that effort could be brought forward to help us?
Yeah, I like what you were saying in terms of working with staff to kind of guide those plans and adjust them, and how you brought up how we did with the UDO. With the TOD, and before that the station area plans. The thing I've been waiting and I've been wanting to see what the next step is, because I think I thought that we should have had a transition once we've completed the TOD districts to go into the next kind of plan, because there's always something to do. So whatever the next group is of plans that we attack, there should be a natural transition into, once that is voted on and completed, to get to the next group and the next group and the next group. If that makes sense.
So now do we want to do, or was that just in jest, some sort of reaction?
They didn't do a thumbs down, so we're good.
Yeah. So the lack of a thumbs down means we're good to go.
Yeah. Tacit acceptance.
Tacit approval works. So, anything thanks us?
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the Great Neighborhoods Committee, we are happy to report out. I want to thank Larkin, Victoria, Deb, the mayor, and our assistant manager Johnson, and Pam for their help and their support. Basically we talked about, as an overriding statement, is how do we create and preserve great neighborhoods? Neighborhoods that are safe, affordable, diverse, and rich in character through the use of new and retool and existing housing and business tools. How do we create and preserve great neighborhoods that are safe, affordable, diverse, rich, through the use of new and retool items? We developed 2 big buckets, a housing tool bucket and a business tool. Under our housing tool, we talked about the investment in the Land Trust to acquire property, the West Side Land Trust for distressed corridors, and land banking along distressed corridors. The overarching theme is land control along these distressed corridors and investing and looking at our tools to do that. Housing affordability. How do we increase home ownership? We're building a lot of apartments. We clearly understand that families gain wealth through home ownership, and that's an area that we really want to begin focusing on and try to work with existing partners through the city in terms of increasing home ownership. We talked about the tax rate for the home stamp exemption as well as aging in place programs in terms of how do we retool those two particular programs to advance our goals and objectives as well. Obviously, we talked about affordable housing. We talked about the upcoming bond campaign. We talked about the assessment of the existing $50 million bond dollars that we've already have, making sure that we know what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, how many units are under construction, what incomes have we served, and should we consider geographic preference or focus for these programs. And so the first bucket was really the housing bucket, the housing tools bucket. The second bucket was the business tools. How do we review commercial property ordinance to ensure maintenance and residential character? How do we consider both the social and the physical infrastructure in new development, and also consider what other community service can be housed out of these development? And last, we talked about the facade and the infrastructure programs. How do we improve, retool existing programs? What other programs should we include? And also, should we consider a geographic preference for and focus for these programs? Again, the overarching statement, how do we create and preserve great neighborhoods that are safe for our community, that are affordable, that are diverse, rich in history and character, through the new tools, retools, and existing housing and business tools. So how do we take a look at what we're doing, and how do we advance what we're doing? That's it. Any questions, comments, criticisms? Talk to Larkin. And feel free, committee members, to jump in.
I'm wondering if you talked at all about location policy and the changes we made not long ago, how those are working, or what your goals are in terms of location for housing.
We touched on it a little bit, not in terms of, again, looking at those policies that we talked about earlier in the presentation in terms of geographically whether or not where they should be focused and located at. I mean, are we putting the dollars where they need to go? Pam, you want to jump in? Right. I see.
No, I would just say you talked a little bit about it, particularly when you talked about creating home ownership, like if you talked about if there are areas that you wanted to target there. So.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Reactions, questions, comments, concerns? I have one. I would suggest just changing that second word. Sorry. I would just suggest changing that second word to might in your overarching question. How might we? Again, there's just, I don't want to say it's magic, but when you explicitly say how might we do this versus how do we, how could we, how should we, you give people this permission to think more broadly. It's a simple but powerful change. That's all I got.
We accepted the friendly amendment.
Thank you. All right, so who's next?
Good afternoon, everyone. So we focused in, we're workforce and business development. We focused in on, and we came up with 3 buckets that I'll walk you through. but really kind of focusing in on what are some very specific yet aspirational objective or goal statements that we at our level in council could hand to Marcus and staff with the policy recommendations that that they could then break down in management kind of key results or deliverables to say, okay, this is what we think we can do with those specifics in mind for these areas. So we bucket these into 3 areas, first of all. The first one was recruitment and retention. The second one, workforce. And the third one, small business. And the statement for recruitment and retention is using innovative and data-based approaches target specific large and small economic development opportunities that deliver measurable ROI for Charlotte as a city. And we chose some of these words specifically, innovative and data-based. One where we're finding now as we're exploring into this space, looking at certain industries and things like that, we don't necessarily just have to lead with incentives and things like that. There are many other things, from deal-making opportunities with the private sector to really showcasing the types of talent that we can offer them that can entice folks to choose us over competitors on its own. We also use the word target specific large and small economic development opportunities. Specific being, I think one point is we no longer have Charlotte doesn't have a chamber of commerce, right? The region has the Alliance, and they use a wide net to cast for all the benefit of the region to find opportunities to recruit and bring folks to town. Great, we need that. But Charlotte doesn't specifically have its own. We're left to do that specific job on our own, as well as we don't necessarily want to cast a net. We want to go spearfishing. So specific meaning going after and really proactively, whether it's tech and fintech companies or whether, like we heard Mark today, we're going to go and just look at New Jersey and see how many folks we can go steal from there. Really targeting that, and then making sure large and small people realize that we're not just talking about Honeywells and Lowe's. We love them, but focusing particularly on recruitment, but also retention of that small business in town and what tools we have there are important. And then finally, economic development opportunities. We didn't say companies. We said particularly, because that could include companies, it could include amateur sports, it could include the university, international university partnership. So that's kind of area 1. Area 2 is workforce. We said establish a next generation connected workforce hub for Charlotte that increases upward mobility reach while decreasing costs per person served. So this was about not saying we're going to overhaul Project Peace. This was about saying, what is the next step from Project Peace? And that's where the word hub kind of came to be, where people in the private sector are doing a lot of things. Charlotte Works, Goodwill, Urban League, many folks like that. And we have things here. How do we consolidate the internal stuff and then connect it to the external stuff, find the gaps, and really find a measurable approach that can go out there and really churn high volumes at a lower cost. And finally, small business, consolidate internal and connect external small business related programs to maximize positive, equitable impact. And this was, again, about, we know we do a lot of stuff inside the walls of the city for small business. It needs to be consolidated. It needs to have, instead of shooting 75 BB guns at the problem, we need to shoot 1 bazooka at it. And we need to further connect with those external groups as well. Yes, guns. When we talked about the policy question for all of these, we really struggled with this because we were like, well, what do you need a policy for versus what can you just have a strategy or an objective? And we actually, I think, comparing this to the work we've done over the last many years on affordable housing, I think we found a solution, which was we already have a recruitment business investment grant, big policy. And we've just overhauled it. We don't need to change that. It exists as a policy. We need to monitor it in this pilot we're going through to make sure it's effectively crafted. But that's like the locational policy. It's a policy by design. But what we require is more of a framework, just like the affordable housing framework, that's more strategic and operational combined for the workforce and small business particularly, which in essence will be defined as a policy in the end, but it's really more of that framework approach. And then finally, you know, our expectations, because I freaking hate writing down like soft mission statement stuff like this so that we all feel touchy-feely and we leave and then nothing actually happens. These are really designed for staff to take these and Marcus to take these and say, here are the 3 or 4 things that we will do, measurable, timelined, with owners to make this workforce goal happen. And I just wrote down a quick example, like this doesn't have to be it, but 1, inventory and map all the internal and external programs touching workforce by the end of Q1. 2, link public-private stakeholders, establish a full service workforce development capacity or capability at X capacity under the price of X dollars per person that we serve. And then 3, serve 500 of them by Q4. So like that's the kind of specificity so that this becomes something that that is a tracking tool and an indication of here's what the measure looks like, and when you've achieved it, you've achieved this, and then we redesign that. You add anything, Braxton or Dimple? You're welcome.
David, I would just say that I think we got exactly where we were going. One, really good discussion by people that really care about these issues, and the committee chairs being the people leading the discussion. So that in itself, I think, was a real accomplishment. But to actually end up with aspirational statements around what we can do, and to begin to see some short-term, and I don't mean short in like 90 days, but the ability to say that we, out of our 2040 plan, will come up with some things that we can adopt in the interim, that's something that I had no expectation for. So the idea that we would look at legacy programs and make them more reflective of aspirational instead of repair and maintenance, again, entirely different approach. And all of us, I think, are excited about workforce and business development in a different way of let's do a project, invite some people to come in here and design something and we pay them to do it. I think the idea of how we begin to look at preparing people long-term for jobs is really something else. So I applaud the success of all 3 groups. I think it's great.
Well, then let's applaud the success of all 3 groups. Why not? Can I invite Marcus to the front? Because, again, as I said earlier, we deviated from what our original plan was. So now we need to figure out what we're going to do to catch up. And so I know we were originally going to plan to have dinner at 7. You know, we're going to break at 5:45 and have dinner at 7. We're going to need to adjust that some. And now I'm going to leave it to Marcus. And Donata, you have something to? Yes. That's a big deal. I will repeat it for volume. The snack room closes at 5 Eastern. Noted. So we talked about we're going to have to adjust the schedule to capture what we were going to do. So do you want to share the news?
I'll give it a shot. So unless there is a strong rally to go the distance today, I think we've accomplished enough in order to, awesome. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about tomorrow, and it's what you would traditionally get in terms of the annual strategy meeting. So Ryan Bergman will start off and discuss where we are in terms of our budget, not only for the fiscal year that ended, but the fiscal year that we're in currently and the next fiscal year. And then we're going to try something a little bit different. And Kelly Flannery will tag team with Ryan on that piece. And then we'll try something a little bit different. And we're going to have Ty and Tracy almost replicate a little bit of what you heard today from the panelists, but from really a city perspective of how we're trying to address some of the challenges that we have in terms of all of the things that you've discussed today. And you know we'll have a heavy dose tomorrow of what I would call mobility, accessibility, connectivity, transportation, transit. We'll have great speakers from across the country that appreciate Ty with some of his relationships to bring this guest panelist tomorrow who will stick with us throughout the course of the day to help us as we move forward. So, Mayor, unless you have something, I will. Okay. I think she wants to go until 6:30.
Not Stephanie. This is not. Yeah. LSU plays Clemson tonight. I brought the tiger head for whomever wants to wear that. Ah, yeah. Huh? They're both tigers. They're both tigers. So, unless you can go, yeah. Princeton once had a player in the football league, didn't they? Didn't they have a player once in the NFL? One time? I can't remember. Okay. Oh, is that the statistician guy? So I just don't know how many of you, but we'll be in room 502 for football tonight. What I would like to suggest is that we actually think about this and maybe do some friendly wagers. And the person that wins gets to choose a donation to their charity based on the wages earned. And so if you really, really care about, housing or jobs or mobility, you can actually make something happen this weekend with a donation. So if you choose to come, that's fine, but the TV will be on in 5-0.
We can bet anything? Can I bet Eastland Mall?
Oh my gosh. Oh, wouldn't that be funny? No, you cannot do that.
Is that cool, Matt?
No, because Dave Tepper has $18 billion and you don't have one. Okay, so feel free, okay? And that's it for me.
We start tomorrow at 9. 7:30. 7:30. We'll start at 8. We'll start at 8. So is dinner still at 7 or is dinner?
Can we move dinner up a little bit? I doubt that. Okay. Well, maybe we'll go have a drink before. So if you'd like, are we good? Here, Ed, you can sell this. I created it, and I'm sure it'll go for